Are we really at the end of the world? Has it come to this?
I certainly wouldn't say we're at the end of the world, but obviously the window of opportunity we have to do something meaningful about climate change is one that closes ever more gradually. One of your earlier guests sort of mentioned the point that this is COP26, there've been 25 before it. There will of course be one next year, but each time as you get later and later in the day, the window of space to avert really quite damaging levels of warming grows ever smaller, and the cuts you need to do that grow ever larger. So to an extent, forming a degree of, even if it's not completely accurate, forming a degree of emphasis on this particular event as a window of opportunity is quite useful.
Howard, we know nudge units and the rest have sought to frighten people into changing their behaviour to fight COVID. Is this just more of the same, do you think?
Well, yes, Neil, and I agree totally with your monologue earlier. It was very, very insightful. And I represent drivers, motorists, van drivers, truckers, and they're all exasperated and confused, and they feel patronised and definitely ignored. And what we're seeing is, I mean, the claimed climate emergency is not supported by real data. Everything is based on modelling and, worryingly, even insultingly, with emotions and scaremongering by well-off commentators. We need honest, accurate, cast-in-stone proof, not emotive BS. And that's what I've got 1.7 million supporters, and I get 2,000 emails a week. And they're crying out, what do I do? We're talking about in 8 years' time, the government have got this edict, which means they can't buy a diesel or petrol car in 2030, a new one. But no one's telling them what they should be buying. They're saying electric vehicles. And then we're telling them that we know the national grid will never be able to support it. The point is, we're being told what to do. We're not being consulted, and no one's being honest with us.
Sam, I'm not the best with numbers, but over the past weeks and months, I've looked into, how we go about providing this amount of energy. Now, without getting into the specifics of it, it's plain that to replace 20, 30 million fossil fuel powered cars, we're going to need, if it's going to be electrical power, we're going to need hundreds of power stations that we don't have at the moment. Now, we can surely all agree that, we've fouled our own nest. There's pollution, there's plastic in the ocean, there's habitat loss. What realistically could and should we be doing better without offering up, fantasies about, replacing like with like when it comes to electric cars?
So I think you raise a really good point there, which is that the British national grid has been sort of woefully underinvested in, and in particularly in when we're bringing on new power. And the further we get, the clearer it seems to me, in my personal opinion, that if we are going to make a sort of meaningful transition, we have to be going all guns blazing on nuclear energy. That's the way to get yourself relatively low price, relatively low carbon fuel for your economy and for your transport system.
Howard, how would you respond to that? I mean, there we are. We're looking at images of a colossal wind turbine and other sources of power that are already available to us. What are the solutions? Would you advocate nuclear power, as Sam suggests?
Absolutely. Nuclear is a great solution, but the point is we need a lot of Hinkley Cs, and probably about 40 Hinkley Cs, and that's going to cost a fortune. It takes years and years and years to get up and running. I mean, what the problem I've got here, can I just say that I want clean air, I want to breathe clean air, and I want our planet to survive forever. All those things we share. I'm not a climate change denier, but I am a climate change realist. And what the problem we have here is that ordinary, hard-working people, drivers in people I support in the UK, will continue to see their freedom and finances slaughtered under a pie-in-the-sky net zero policies for a minuscule 1% contribution to the global CO2 issue. I mean, they're bombarded with already things. They're already paying of LTNs, clean air zones, congestion charges, all these things. They're going to work, they're going to the doctors, they're going to colleges and things like that. They've got no choice. And thankfully, this week, I managed to secure another freeze in fuel duty for 12 years. But I've been bombarded by trolls on Twitter and all over the place, environmentalists saying I'm wrecking the planet because we didn't have an increase in fuel duty. Let me just please repeat this one thing. We are still the highest taxed motorists in the world. And places like Germany, Italy and France, they subsidise diesel. with lower fuel duty. We don't. We've done enough here in the UK. We're like a pimple on the backside of the planet. Please, can we all work together and consult with the real people that matter, and those are the people that use our roads, and they need to use their vehicles. And that's where I'm coming from.
Sam, you hear the unmistakable emotion and depth of feeling in Howard's voice there, and what he's saying. I've long suspected now that it's not about going green so much as going without. And I wonder if the reality is that that's being left behind, that people aren't being invited to contemplate, is not having cars at all and having less energy in our homes, simply having access to less of everything that we have come to take for granted. Am I right in thinking that? And if so, will there have to come a point where the government fesses up, so to speak, and says, you're not going to have an electric car, and you're not going to have a warm home and 5 showers a day if you want them with lovely warm water. You're just going to have less, and you will learn to like it as your grandparents did.
So this is a really interesting point, because we went into this with yourself and Howard sort of talking about emotive scaremongering on the sort of pro-climate action side. And now we're sort of hearing these stories of you won't have showers, you won't have heating in your home, our poor drivers are woefully overtaxed. Frankly, our drivers aren't taxed enough. Fuel duty has been frozen for 11 years. They pump out fumes which are harmful to health of the people around them. I live next to a very busy road. Obviously, it's not great for the air quality around here. I'd much rather they were paying higher fuel charges and driving a bit less. So, the thing is, we're trying to give people incentives to do things which are better for the climate. And some of that is going to have to be by switching patterns of consumption away from driving, away from using fuel in intensive ways. If you give people incentives to purchase things which are more energy efficient, to live lives which are more energy efficient, yes, it does mean a transition in the way you live, but it doesn't necessarily mean living with less. It means living differently.
Is that not just the impossible dream? More efficient. You can't get energy from nowhere. There is a price that has to be paid. If we're going to have energy, it has to come from somewhere. Howard, I saw you shaking your head there when you were listening to Sam talk about the need to tax motorists more. Do you have solutions to the problems? Because clearly there are problems.
Yes, we do, Neil.
And if so,
it's
what
a very
are
simple
they?
thing. I'm losing you. I'm slightly losing you here, but we do have solutions, and one is consultations with drivers. That's one thing to do. The second thing is there are practical solutions now that half emissions. There's in the USA, in Texas, for example, it's mandatory to supply a fuel catalyst in bulk delivery to garages, which reduces emissions by 50%, and that's mandated in Texas state law. And it also improves fuel consumption. But that's not considered. What we have over here is you are going to have to pay extra congestion charge, etc., etc. They block roadways with bicycle lanes, which I support, but not blocking existing roads. And what does that cause? It causes congestion and more pollution. Let's be fair on this. CO2 is a fertiliser. There's not a climate change crisis. What we need to do is, as quite rightly Neil pointed out, our pollution stuff, etc., in terms of plastics, in terms of the stuff that's being thrown out in terms of sewage around our coasts at the moment. That's the sort of thing we should be addressing. We cannot affect, and I'm saying this really, do you think humans can stop the climate from changing? I don't think so.
Sam, how do you respond? I think Howard raises a point there, something that a lot of people share, and a lot of scientists echo that sentiment, that the climate is changing, but our species' ability to affect it one way or the other is at least up for debate.
I don't think it is up for debate. I think Howard has crossed into what I would term misinformation at this point. Probably not deliberately, but it's simply I think it's pretty much not in question at this point that humans do have the ability to affect the climate. That putting out large amounts of greenhouse gases does make a difference. And that, while I'm sure he's doing the best for his members in sort of pushing these measures, it is a fact that fuel does release emissions, and that these emissions are harmful. CO2 may well be a fertilizer, but it's also a greenhouse gas, and it does make a difference to the amount of heat that is retained, which in I think the interesting thing is, as you say, there's a very large amount of sort of carbon that comes in and out of natural systems each year. But the thing is, what we're doing is we're upsetting the balance by putting in a little bit more each year, a little bit more. It mounts up over time, and then you have the feedback loops, which ends the whole thing really quite damaging.
Bear with me, gentlemen, while I open this up to the panel. Fraser, where are you on this argument? You know, are we looking in the right direction? Are we trying to solve the problems we really can solve, or are we overlooking the other things that we could be doing but we're not doing because they're not quite as glamorous and world-changing?
Yeah, I think, you know, nuclear was mentioned earlier, and I think that's a really instructive example because, you know, that is a carbon-free source of energy. And yet, at the same time, many of the people who are most green, most, you know, the strongest on the kind of environmentalist spectrum are very much opposed to nuclear energy because I think there is a kind of ideological sense that we should have less, that it's good to have less. There's also that going on in the background as well, that we shouldn't take our eye off. And I think one of the things that worries me about when we're talking about the climate change, climate emergency, with the rhetoric ramping up all the time, is it means we don't really take a step back and think about, you know, practical solutions. We're sort of railroaded into this kind of predetermined path of net zero and the like.
Are we chasing the impossible dream, John?
Yeah, of course we are. We're not going to get to net zero. So absolute nonsense.
One of the phrases that I will carry with me this evening is when Howard says that we're a pimple in the backside of the planet. in as much as, you know, we're involved with 1% of emissions. A country like China's involved with a third or a quarter.
And China aren't even there. And does Russia. It's just ludicrous. We can do our bit. We should do our bit. I think we're already punching above our weight. And as individuals, we can. The problem is the political establishment, the elite in this country and indeed in countries around the world, apart from China and Russia, have made their mind up. They've made their mind up. Net zero, that's where we're going, end of. Even Boris has been persuaded to go that way. And there is no choice. This will come back to bite them. I don't know how it's going to happen. It's not going to be at the ballot box, because who could you vote for? Boris has already got 60 or 80 majority, and people love him, whether we like it or not.
When we are 1%, when we're affecting 1% of what's happening, who benefits? You know, is it the case that the rest of the world, China and the rest, are waiting to see if we come up with the $64,000 answer, the technology that they can then adopt, or are they just going to watch us deindustrialise ourselves and take advantage of it?
It's a bit like COVID, isn't it? Who's benefited the most from the pandemic? It's China. I hate to bring the subject up, but it is China. And we still don't know where that came from. Well, we kind of all got suspicions of where it came from. But going on, that China are just going to keep on building power stations, coal-fueled power stations. And Fraser's right to talk about nuclear, but we are 40 or 50 years too late. The very people now who are into the green and gluing themselves to the floor, they were the people who didn't want nuclear power. And there's a lot of, you know, the Chernobyl effect that people think, you know, it's dangerous. Well, that was a very old plant and not maintained, etc., in the former Soviet Union. But we've got to go nuclear, of course. But they are softening us up. That's what's going on at the moment, to take less, to have less. You are right. You are 100% on the money.
We're going to come back to all of this.
We might not have anyway.
We're going to come back to all of this. Thank you so much to our guests, Howard and Sam. Thank you for being there. Thank you for bringing that open and stimulating debate. And I'll hopefully cross paths with both of you again soon.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.